This is her feeding tube. Where do the meds go? I don't like clamping and unclamping, clamping and unclamping. And if you forget to unclamp it and you do this, meds spray out. Hey guys, it's early morning, so Raylan's still sleepy. This is her feeding tube, and she has 2 ports, and actually they say on them exactly what they go to. This one says gastric. Gastric means it goes to her stomach, and this one will say on it jejunum, and jejunum means it goes to that section of her small intestine. I don't know if you can see me. Now, first thing, where do the meds go? That depends on the person. Raylan has 2 meds that go in her stomach. Her omeprazole, which is for reflux because it works better if it starts in her stomach, and her Epidiolex or CBD oil. That's oily. Oily stuff hardens feeding tubes. It hardens the extension and it hardens the actual tube itself. Oily, fatty things. So to keep it from hardening too much, we don't want to put it through the jejunum. The jejunum has a long tube that goes, from her stomach into her intestine. So we put this one through the least amount of feeding tube possible, which means the oil goes in her gastric port. Now this is the thing people don't know exists. This syringe is different from this syringe. If you can tell, this one's just a little bit thinner, and that means it slips right in here without an extension. You don't need an extension for this. Some people say it's not good for the feeding tube. We've never broke a feeding tube using these. No extension needed. That is awesome, especially if your kid's not always on continuous feeds and doesn't always have an extension right there. Definitely recommend that. So I'm gonna flush. Everyone flushes with a different amount. We just flush with 5 mils in that. It's more than enough to get it through. Okay, now we're gonna do these other meds. What they teach in nursing school, I'm pretty sure, is to push pause on the feeding tube if it's running. So I'm not gonna push pause. I'm gonna do this. It's quicker. I just crimped it. The food cannot go through. Then they teach you to lamp it with this clamp and then open it and put your meds in the med port. See, the med port's on the side. Unclamp it, put your food in. Now, even if you've paused your food, if you don't do this and you put meds in, it didn't do it this time, but sometimes the meds will go back this way. They won't go down. So I think doing this, crimping it right here works great. I don't like clamping and unclamping, clamping and unclamping. And if you forget to unclamp it and you do this, meds spray out. So I don't do the clamping and unclamping. I crimp the bottom. Now I can take this one out, put the next one in, uncrimp, put the meds through, crimp instead of clamp. Crimping instead of clamping is so much quicker. And that syringe I put right in here, it goes in either one. Put the meds through, crimp, flush, crimp, close that port. I never paused her food, nothing leaked. By not clamping, I don't accidentally forget to unclamp it. By not pausing the food or turning the food pump off, I don't forget to turn it back on. I recommend this crimp method. It works great. Other things, you will clog feeding tubes sometimes, especially if a person has to take crushed meds. The pills, they're just more likely to clog the feeding tube. Or the hospitals, I think this is their purple ibuprofen. It's just such a thick liquid that I feel like it clogs the feeding tube. So maybe it's it combined with crushed pills. When you clog a feeding tube, people say use Coca-Cola. I've heard that a million times. Soda has never worked for us, ever. I know it works for some people, but soda's never worked for us. What works is getting the warmest water we can stand to touch. If we can stand to touch it, it's not gonna burn her, and flushing it through. Now, the next thing that's important, and a nurse taught me this, but most people don't know it because her feeding tubes got clogged lots of times at the hospital, so I have to help the nurses unclog it. And so they're like, oh, I didn't know that trick. This is just another pressure trick. The thinner your syringe is, the smaller it is, the more force it's gonna push in. It's just kind of like if you wear high heels, that heel puts so much, that's like stiletto heel, puts so much pressure in one spot. So if you have a feeding tube clogged, you don't want to get the biggest syringe you can. You want to get the smallest syringe. Often this 5 mil one works, but if something's really clogged, I get a cup of water as hot as I can stand to touch it, and I get a 1 mil syringe and just keep using it until it goes through. Some people are afraid to push too hard on the feeding tube. I'm not sure why. We don't have a choice. A G button you can change at home. They're real easy. The J button, like I said, this has a tube that they use radiology to see where they're guiding it, but it's long. It's like a long straw, and it goes into her small intestine. We can't change that at home because we can't pull that straw out and then get it back in. It's not straw, but I mean, it looks like a flexi tube. So if we have this clogged at home, our choice is to drive 90 minutes to St. Louis Children's and ask them to change the GJ tube or try to unclog it, or do it at home. Well, we're going to do everything we can to keep ourselves from driving there, because worst case scenario, and we mess this up, we just have to drive to Children's and they'll replace it. So I push hard. If I've clogged the tube, I'm going to crimp this end, put in my smallest syringe possible, and you can bounce it. You can, like, I can't do it because that's not clogged, but you kind of just bounce the hot water in, and then you'll feel it go through. That works every time. We've never had to replace a tube for clogging it. I had a nursing instructor clog her feeding tube in front of all the nursing students one time when we were in the hospital. It's a teaching hospital. She's like, "Can I show everyone her feeding tube?" Hot water in a small barrel syringe will unclog it. We had, this nurse he was a great nurse. He wasn't new, I don't think, but he was new to working at Children's. It was his first night on the job, because he told me he clogged her feeding tube. He was like, "It's my very first night working here." He was nervous because he just, you're new. You don't want to have hiccups your first day. I'm like, "We're going to get it unclogged." It took us about 5 minutes of really warm water and patience, just kind of tapping at it. But that's what works best for us, not soda for us. Definitely try soda if you get a feeding tube clogged, but as warm a water as we can touch and as small a syringe as you can find, that's the best tip. That's syringe meds. That's what we know. Right, Raylan? Boop.